Keep moving. Keep moving. You can see this is all a repeat if you make more applications. Okay, keep going. You have lots of pages. So hold on a second. So there was a different page there. It's not that critical, but in case you had a greenhouse trial, it has a space for application records for greenhouse trial. So can you continue on to part 7? Just keep moving until you get to part 7. While she's okay, there's okay. So part 7, sample collection. So you've already completed your application. Now it's time to harvest the sample. Okay. So this is a form to document the sample collection. Okay. So you include information such as the number of plants, trees, bushes, or areas that you've collected from, the number of rows, check the number of fruit or heads or roots or plants or whatever is required by the protocol. Was it less than 50% of the harvestable crop, either yes or no? And was each sample collection in a separate run through the plot? Okay, we have another person joining from Indonesia. Welcome, Elizabeth. Okay, so you also describe the equipment. This may be something such as a clipper, a scissors. You may use a knife to cut the fruit or to cut some part of the crop that you need to collect. Okay. Order of sample collection. So the order of sample collection, hopefully you should be collecting the control sample first and then the treated. Okay. And then there's a space here for a written description of what you did. Okay. Next page, please. So here's where you're putting it into storage. Okay. So were the harvested crops collected directly into residue bags, either yes or no? Because in some cases, you may sample later. There are a few examples of this. For example, if you're growing onions, you may cut the onions, lift them out of the ground, or cassava, you may lift it out of the ground. You may allow it to dry somewhat and cut off the top. And then later, you would go back and then collect the sample. Okay. For some of the other crops we have, for example, basil. We're going to be working with basil. So you're going to be cutting fresh basil in the field. That fresh basil will go directly into a sample bag, but some of that fresh basil will be going into an area where you dry it, because we want to take some of the sample and produce fresh basil and dry basil. And then we're going to take those and analyze those as separate samples. Okay? All right, can you go down to the next page, please? So you describe the temperatures at which you're storing the samples at from the time that you harvested the crop until the time that you brought them to the freezer. And this is a log to inventory the samples, the sample identification. That should correspond with the protocol. The crop fraction, that could be fruit, it could be leaves, it could be roots. The weight, when the sample was collected, when it was put in the freezer, and then the elapsed time from the time you harvested it until the time that you put it in the freezer. And then the identification of which freezer you put it in, and then the initials and date of the person who put it in the freezer. Next page, please. So you've collected your samples already. You've put them in the freezer. And here, you're monitoring the temperature. So this is the date, the minimum and maximum temperature, and the initials. Again, if you have some recording device, it may already automatically log the date and the minimum maximum temperature. So you could simply include that information on the following pages. And you'd probably have a different log for your untreated control samples and your treated samples. So you will need at least 2 freezers, or you need a way in which you can physically separate the samples within one freezer. Okay, next page, please. So this is just a log of the samples. So you first indicated when you collected them and when you put them in the freezer. You have information on the minimum and maximum temperatures. And this is a log of when, through the whole process, you were either entering or removing samples in and out of the freezer. Okay. Next page, please. If you had to repair your freezer, you should enter it here. Hopefully none of you have that problem. Next slide, please, or next page, please. So, can you stop there? This part 8 is for residue shipping, sample shipping. In most cases, I don't expect you to ship your samples. I expect that you're going to have your samples, you're going to collect them in the field, you're going to be analyzing them within the same country, and it's close enough that you're going to drive the samples maybe in a car or a pickup truck from the field to the laboratory where they're going to be analyzed, and they'll be placed in freezers in their laboratory. Next slide, please. I should say next page, please. So this is just an additional page for shipping. This is the chain of custody form. So when the people in the lab receive the samples that you ship, they would look through this form to confirm whether or not it agrees with the information that they actually see from the samples themselves. Okay, next page, please. So this is a checklist for the condition of the samples. Did you use dry ice with the samples? Did you use maybe wet ice? Have have they still remained frozen, or have they thawed? Okay. Next page, please. So this is the same page, but you would want to use one for your control samples and one for your treated samples. Next page, please. Okay, so if you're doing a field trial, that field trial is subject to whatever temperature is outside, the amount of sun per day, the amount of irrigation, the amount of rainfall. So you'll need to collect the air temperature and rainfall. Rainfall, you can simply utilize a rain gauge for that type of information. And you'd enter it in this log. Next page, please. So you'd enter information about irrigation, if the plots were irrigated, the type of irrigation, and then you'd also, remember on the previous page, you entered the dates of the irrigation. Okay, we have a question. Do we need to fill in the sample custody form if the analysis were done in the same laboratory? No, you do not need the custody form because it's going directly into the laboratory. There's no shipping involved. That custody is only needed if there's shipping. Okay. All right. Next page, please. So here you would include a copy of the protocol and any changes that were made to the protocol. So this is just a place to indicate, hey, here's where I put this information. Next page, please. So this is a deviation form. So you'd include information such as the date the deviation occurred, when it was recognized, when the study was notified. In other words, when did you let me know that there was a problem in the field? How did you notify me? Did you notify me by telephone? Did you send me an email? And what is this a deviation from? Is it deviation from a protocol, or is it deviation from an SOP? Do you indicate the section of the protocol that was affected? Okay. A description of the deviation, explain why, and then it's up to the study director to say whether or not this deviation was acceptable. Okay. Any questions about that form? Okay. I think that brings us to the end. And you scroll down. Are there any more pages, or that's the last page? I believe that's the last page. Very good. All right, so are there any questions about anything I've covered in these forms? Okay. So this is a blank version of the 2020 Field Data Notebook. So now is time for a break. We will have a 10-minute break. So I have 15 minutes after the hour. So we will come back at 25 minutes after the hour. Or wherever you are, come back 10 minutes from now. Okay? And Nui, if you can get the next presentation up, please bring up one of the field data notebooks. I would prefer if you bring up the field data notebook with the with the dragon fruit study. All right, and if you could do that in the interim, that would be great. So we are now still on the break, so enjoy your break.